Welcome to the hustle and bustle of DMEXCO 2015, and we are in one of the quieter halls actually. It is absolutely chock-a-block out there, but I'm delighted to say that someone that's made their way through the crowds and joined us for a quick chat is the inimitable David Shing from AOL. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
How
mate.
are you finding it so far?
A little overwhelming. The weather is underwhelming, the people are overwhelming. So I should say in the middle, it's very whelming.
Yes.
It's cool.
Are you a DMEXCO veteran?
Not a veteran, no. I mean, I came here years and years ago when it was all about hubs and switches and engineers talking to engineers.
Yeah.
But, I came back again last year and spoke a few times, and the reception's been amazing, and this marketplace is truly not just about Germany, clearly. It's about global, and it's been remarkable to see how this thing's transformed.
Yeah. How does it compare with other of these sort of big global events you go to?
Yeah, great question. How does it compare? It's still, it's a lot about the business here, so it's less about celebration. And I guess maybe that's kind of the ethos of why they brought it together initially.
Yeah.
So it's really about kind of not just the business of the business, but also what's powering it behind it and what's sort of some of the technology that's powering it. So I'm really intrigued by understanding that.
Yeah.
As a creative, I typically sit on the front line of stuff, and it's nice to see what's going on in the back line to make it feel more invisible. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. We spoke to Jonathan Nelson from M&M, who
yes.
you're going to be joining on stage later on. Are you able to give us a sneak peek as to what you're going to be discussing?
Yeah, well, thanks for putting me on the spot. Now I've got to think about what the hell I'm going to discuss. No, what's going to be, I think, interesting about our discussion is that, Omnicom have been very much around about, they lent into programmatic way before a lot did. And it's not just bringing together the invisibleness of it all in terms of making things seamless. They do it in the creative front end as well. So we're going to talk about, my setup is I'm all about the story, less about the telling. It's all about the evidence of what these new consumers are up to. If there's going to be less about the advertising and more about advocacy, what are we going to do to embrace that, and where can there be innovation around, or even disruption actually, invention around programmatic? Because, I hear there is topics like, is programmatic here to stay? I mean, wait, what? It's not even discussion anymore, man, because that's already the transparent layer. It's what are the things that's stacking on top so people can articulate what does it mean for them and how do they actually enjoy the experience of what programmatic means for a brand marketer.
Yeah. And talking programmatic, it's been a big year for AOL with the one product and more announcements yesterday regarding creativity. And is that the next hurdle for brands? Is actually how to use all of this amazing tech that we can see everywhere in these halls to actually really cut through and resonate with consumers? I
mean, bloody great question. Here's the deal, man. Once the piping's there, once you've laid the foundation, you need to build upon that. And the build upon that's the presentation layer, as I call it. Yep. So the programmatic piece has been great, and we've been fortunate enough to have launched one this year, and it's really allowed us to make sure that we've had all that in play and bring people to the forefront of what programmatic means. Now, what we launched yesterday was one by AOL Creative, and what that brings is sort of all of the pieces of dynamic creative to the front line and understand what that presentation layer is, and that can only be more advanced and more developed. But if you think about it, right time, right place, right person, the next thing's the right message. Now the messaging piece is still really hard, right? The creatives are stuck in the back room, in the dark corners, building out buttons and banners, but how do we automate some of that? How do we programmatically make that more effective and more efficient? And so it's not just about efficiency, it's actually about hyper-targeting. But again, it's seamless. Yeah. If all the piping for programmatic means that I can target the right person, right place, right time, then what does it mean as a creative? What does that do for the messaging? So the messaging should be sort of really interestingly dynamic. Yeah. Whether you decide to display a phone number because you're watching something in OTT, or whether you decide to display a call to action button in creative, that dynamic layer of understanding what those layers can do in terms of, the technical piece, that's really fascinating to see how creatives are going to run away with that.
Yeah. And what does it mean for AOL? It's a really interesting develop, trying to be at the forefront of these changes. Where are you guys going?
I mean, the reality of it is, we're bringing together a number of these properties, as you saw. We've taken over the advertising from Microsoft. We've been acquired by Verizon. What this all leads you to, and there's a discussion around what's happening in the industry, is around ecosystem. What does that mean? It means you're seamlessly able to identify somebody and take them all the way through the food chain of content, of what they're consuming, and ultimately bring brands to people and then bring people to brands. Yeah. That's really what we're doing at AOL. If we're able to do that in this ecosystem, the whole thing's going to seem more seamless, and it's going to be less about advertising and more about this advocacy layer, which is, wow, that was pretty cool. How do I make sure that either I want more of that or I tell more people about that? And that's kind of an interesting place that we're at. Yeah. That's the fulcrum where I think we're at as an industry. We're just blessed that we're at the forefront of it, I think.
Yeah. And finally, really, I suppose so much different technology here, so many different companies kind of bubbling up to the surface. What's exciting you at the moment about the industry? Any trends or any particular innovations that you think are really hot?
Yeah, what I think is interesting generally, obviously, is hardware still. So Internet of Things is a tried and tried experience, but it is the Internet of everything. Everything is wanting to be connected. What does that mean in terms of that collecting of data? What does that mean in presenting the data? Because more and more of these things have screen on them. Everything's starting to become sort of softly close to us, and we're collecting all this data. So when we move from self-quant, which is me measuring me, into me using that data for other people to use to better me, for example, that would be really interesting to see what that will do around innovation. But that's kind of, in the technology sector. In what we're doing, generally in the media space, where I think it's interesting is the blend between what is scaled, the T-bar I call it, what's scaled at the moment, and how do we go deep with engagement. So how do we touch everybody at scale, and then how do you go deeply engage with them? So that it's not a tug of war, but it's the evolution of what happens when we speak out of one side of our mouth about programmatic, and then on the other side, how do we talk about engagement with native, and what does that mean for those advancements? So I think the current blend of both of those, which is if that can be informed outside of advertising into how do you make sure content is received in a way that feels like it's sort of auto-magically created for somebody, that would be interesting. The dynamicness of what we can do with content outside of what we can do programmatically in ads, I think will be a tremendous advancement of where we are today.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time, and look forward to speaking soon.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers. Thank
you.